Well, hello and welcome to our DASA Master Series webinar. My name is Deborah Burton, and I am your host and moderator of today's session. What I want to do, though, before we really get started, I want to just launch a quick poll to make sure that you can actually hear my voice clearly and that you can see my slides. Okay, the majority of you have voted. And excellent. Very good. Thank you for that. So, again, my name is Deborah Burton, and I am the marketing lead for DASA DevOps Agile Skills Association, and I'm also the channel marketing manager here at Entrepreneurs. And it's my pleasure to host you today. I'm really excited to be joined today by Troy DeMolin, who is the Vice President of Research and Development at Pink Elephant. We're going to spend some time, Troy is going to spend some time talking to you about DevOps principles and practices from a leadership perspective. And I know that's a very interesting topic for many of you, so I'm so pleased that Troy is here. I'm also going to spend a moment to talk to you a little bit about the DevOps Agile Skills Association and then give you an idea of some of the webinars that are also happening later this month, actually tomorrow. So why don't we get started? So a little bit about the DevOps Agile Skills Association. As you may know, we launched the DevOps Agile Skills Association in April of this year, and it really is an open and independent association that's looking toward the development of high-performance IT organizations in the areas of DevOps. Our objective is setting the stage for the DevOps Agile Skills Association, or DASA as we call it, as a open global initiative to develop competencies that will benefit individuals, teams, and organizations. And that's why we feel it's really important to offer these type of thought leadership webinars that will provide practical insights and guidance into the DevOps competencies. So with that, what I'd like to do is just take a moment to introduce our guest presenter. But before I do that, I actually have a couple of poll questions that both Troy and I are very interested in learning a little bit about you. So the first thing I'd like to know, we would like to know, is what is your experience with DevOps? Are you a DevOps guru? Are you an Agile Scrum expert? Are you someone that has experience with both DevOps and Agile? Do you know a bit about DevOps, and that's why you're joining us today, because you'd like to know a bit more? Or you have no experience with DevOps or Agile at this time? Oh, great. I see the lion's share of you have voted. Okay, for you last-minute people, vote really quick. Okay. Fantastic. So let me share the results. So if we take a look at this, we don't have any gurus joining us today, but 61%, Troy, of the folks that are kind enough to be here with us today, they know a bit about DevOps, but they're definitely interested in knowing more. And the other large group is that they have experience with both DevOps and Agile. So very pleased to welcome you here and to have you there, and we're going to have an opportunity to talk about just these things during today's webinar. Now I have one more webinar for you, because one more poll for you, because I'm also very interested in trying to understand what your interest is in DevOps. Do you have the responsibility for it in your company? Are you like the team lead for DevOps? Or do you just want to understand more about how DASA DevOps can help your team? Are you interested in learning more about the competence and qualification model? Or are you, like I can be many times, just a bit curious to find out more? Okay, great. Everybody is voting. I love it when everybody votes. Fantastic. Let me share the results. Oh, okay, so 42% of you are interested in learning more about the DevOps competence and qualification model. We have 29% that want to understand more about how DevOps can help their teams. And I think that's one of the things that Troy will really be focusing on today. And many of you have the responsibility of DevOps in your company, so that's great. And just like myself, a few of you are a bit curious. So thank you for that, and thank you for participating in those polls with us. So now I'm going to go back to the presentation. And I just want to take the opportunity to introduce you to Troy DeMullen. If you don't know Troy, he is one of these really guru expert people out there. He is the Vice President of Research and Development at Pink Elephant. And Pink Elephant is also a forerunner member of DASA. And we are very privileged to have him here to provide his perspective as well as his experience in the importance of DevOps leadership. So Troy is a little background on him. He is a leading ITIL and IT governance authority with a solid and rich background in executive IT management consulting. Troy holds the ITIL Service Manager and Expert certifications, as well as has extensive experience in leading IT service management programs with a regional as well as global scope. He's a frequent speaker at IT management events and is a contributor, author to multiple ITSM and Lean IT books. He's also been very instrumental in the development of Lean IT with the Lean IT Association. And his publications also include ITIL, Planning to Implement IT Service Management, and Continual Service Improvement. So Troy, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We are all very interested in hearing more on your topic of DevOps Principles and Practices, a leadership perspective. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Deborah. It's a delight and pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Many people are, thinking about the question, what is DevOps and how does it apply to me? Because in many different scenarios, it has different meanings. And that's part of what we're here to discuss today, is to understand this from a leadership perspective. So I'm going to switch the slide over to the agenda here. Okay, that works. I'm clicking. There we go. So we're going to start with an interesting statement, the dualistic nature of IT, and how we have paradoxes in the context of the goals we're trying to achieve. We're going to look at the kind of current scenario and focus of our industry around velocity, and looking at velocity in comparison to the term agility. They're not necessarily positive or negative, but at least to understand what is Agile, what is velocity, and how do they compare, and what is the point of making the difference. And then we're going to look at the critical and diverse dimensions of DevOps. DevOps is one of these words, it's definitely on the hype of the buzz curve, as they say. And many people are thinking they understand it, but the reality is it's, first of all, emergent practice. So what it was, let's say, a year ago to what it now kind of entails and holistically looks at is a bit different today. I've spoken with people who kind of whisper it in a dark room, and they say, well, DevOps is. You can't really define it. The moment you define it, you kill it. Well, it'll kill the spirit. Well, I'm not exactly in that camp. But I do believe it's broader than many people think about. There's the old metaphor of the 7 blind men and the elephant, an apt metaphor, of course, here. You each take a look at the elephant, the 7 blind men in this metaphor. They're arguing on the park bench about what is this thing and called an elephant, and they all, of course, have a strong opinion one way or the other, and they're going to, of course, now deal with this opinion, and they all march down and find themselves an elephant, and each of them grab a different part of the elephant. One says, well, of course, I'm grabbing the leg, right? This elephant is like a tree. Another one grabs the trunk and says, no, it's like a snake, and another one grabs the tail, it's a whip. Another one grabs the ear, and it's, kind of this tent. The reality is DevOps is kind of like that. It's a combination of many different things, and this session, this webinar, is to kind of give you this holistic perspective, a systemic perspective of this term DevOps. That's the goal. So let's begin with the dualistic nature of IT. A lot of what the focus of DevOps is around begins with understanding Lean, and that's why my interest in DevOps has been, of course, brought to the surface, because much of the principles of DevOps come from the adoption of lean thinking and lean practices within organizations. To give you a sense of how the evolution has occurred over the last few years, this is a great slide to kind of describe it. So if you were to ask me in a conversation, what the business cared about, what IT was focused on 5 years ago, I would have said, well, we want mature practices for service management or SDLC or project management. We want to be, in a situation where we're offering good partnership in strategic differentiation to the business. We want to ensure that we have reliable, available, compliant, resilient services. And all of these things are well and good, but the conversation has shifted over the past couple of years. In fact, today, if you were to ask the same questions, I'm sure you'd probably hear different words. Well, we need to be nimble, we need to be fast, we need to be agile, we need to be, we need to do more with less. So this whole conversation in the world of IT and the world we live in has changed its tone and tenure. Not that we have to let go or can let go of any of the previous words. We still have to deliver quality, which is what you can actually sum up all of those words to actually mean, but we have to do it somehow faster, right? More with less. We've all heard the scenario. The speed of demand is outpacing the speed of supply. We're not able to scale to context of business demand. All of these are now the focus comments and elements of our conversations. This is why Lean, Agile, and DevOps has recently risen to prominence in our culture and our industry. So Lean begins this conversation by saying that value is going to be delivered in 3 ways. A, I give you the quality, that's the available, reliable, resilient service. But B, I want to do that by improving flow, improving the speed of continuous flow, ideally rapidly accelerating the overall value systems we exist in, like service management, project management, or SDLC. So think about Lean as a way not only to look at quality, but to accelerate flow, right? To accelerate the delivery of value. So Lean, we're going to see, comes back into the conversation of DevOps big time. But where Agile kind of spun off about 5-6 years ago was based on the premise of small batch, better to work on small iterative work packages than large monolithic things that tie us down and our resources pulled in for long periods of time. Let's work on smaller batch pieces of work. We call them sprints, and we'll focus on how do we adapt and adopt our sprint method. Every time we produce value, we can then move on to the next and dynamically change direction. But the problem with the Agile premise was it was, first of all, focused. It's not really a standard per se, and that's not a problem. We'll come back to that. But there's lots of variants, and we'll talk about that as well. You can see a few on the picture here. The problem with Agile wasn't the challenge of being Agile. It was what it was focused on. And so think about the entire value system we live in today. People have conversations with customers and they plan. They then hand over those plans to builders and project managers. They build. And then the challenge of that is that it has to be put into production, into the operate or run mode. Until it is actually received in run, value is not delivered. The challenge with the Agile premise is it accelerated the SDLC, the software development and project side of things, but it forgot to include the move to production and the run premise, causing a bottleneck right before go to production. And of course, if you've read the Phoenix Project, which is a popular book in our industry right now, there's this poor guy, Brent. Brent's a single point of success. All things flow through Brent. And so what we ended up having was this big bottleneck of work piling up because we hadn't considered the entire value stream. Now enter DevOps. Says, hey, we need to think about the entire value stream. We can't just accelerate the front end. We do need this small batch premise, that Agile, but we need to bring ops forward into design. Let's put a DevOps team together that represents the entire end-to-end value system so that we don't have this challenge of disconnect and handoff. So bring back the missing piece into the value stream orientation, which is where Lean started the conversation, and we're going to see that Lean is a big part of this. So DevOps and Agile are really children of Lean. And they're all accelerators on something. What are they accelerating? They're accelerating everything we've always done. You can't accelerate nothing. So you're accelerating this value stream conversation of strategy, design, transition, operations. You're accelerating the SDLC project methodology. you're accelerating something, in this context, the work you currently do. So these are accelerators on top of our practices, our value stream, and activities. So it's good to understand how this all evolved and why we're going to see, almost as if they're all connected, because in essence they are. So to begin with, we'll start with principles. We're going to see this come back a couple of times. Principles are the things we believe, and practices are the things we do. So the principles of DevOps, as published in basically the community of DevOps right now, are surrounding this acronym called COMS. And so we talk about the fact that culture is a major component. We believe that a focus on people and the collective relationship of people is more important, because if we have a group that is pulled together for a collective purpose, in fact, that's the definition of a team from Ketchenbach, that we have a group of people who have a shared interest, a shared value system, and a shared sense of ownership in something they generally produce as a team, then they will have more accountability and more effectiveness in how they do that. So this DevOps team is to basically pull together a representation from the different tribes of IT into one now cohesive team with a cohesive identity. We, the team, support this service, and we do it as fast as we possibly can. And they do that through change and experimentation. Automation, a great part of acceleration, even in the context of lean, we call it machine time, is that if we can automate certain parts of the value stream, that allows the skills and the knowledge of the human capital and resources to basically be doing productive stuff. So what can we move to machine time? Automation through automated test and automated provisioning to production. Of course, we have lean in the conversation of how do we define quality value in the context of quality, delivery, and cost. And the whole small batch and feedback loops comes from this premise of let's work in small iterative versus large monolithic. Measurement, we're looking at measurement differently. In the past, we've looked at measurement not only more predominantly from a silo or task basis. Now we're looking at lean measures like cycle time, which is the end-to-end of the value system delivery, or lead time, which in lean is the conversation of I've placed an order with you and I get it at the other end. So these measures are more specifically holistic to the entire system of value delivery coming from lean. Because we don't have this us and them mentality, right? That's dev and that's ops, and even in dev I have these X towers and ops those Y towers. I believe in the reality that if we have this shared accountability and ownership, then I'm going to share my information with you because I have your best interest at heart. So this shared learning is part of this cultural premise. So this is the principles. We the people believe in these things, and they're all good. So there's a conversation on the internet right now that really it should say clams because lean is kind of leading the way, but comms is a nicer word, so we'll leave it with comms. So we'll continue. These are the things that DevOps believes in. Now, what then can we consider the practices of DevOps, the things that make up DevOps? And this is where it becomes a little bit interesting, because DevOps isn't just one thing. The best word I've heard used to describe DevOps as a something is a mashup. Mashup simply means it's a combination of many things. So starting on the left and kind of going to the right, it's about culture, structure, and teaming. So strategies around reducing handoff and building cohesive teams that collectively own. So this is the premise of a quote-unquote DevOps team. It's about lean thinking, removing waste in the conversation. It's about understanding how do we improve the quality and the speed of flow through the value system. It's about Agile project management. That's still a major part of that. We can accelerate the front end of the value stream, and that's important, right? Our SDLC has to have this small batch premise. It's about theory of constraints. Those of you who know Eli Goldratt's book, The Goal, it started this, almost 20 years ago in the manufacturing space, but it has some basic principles that any value system is basically governed in speed by its bottleneck. And to understand how to improve flow, you have to get into bottleneck management. Because if you optimize a non-constraint, a non-bottleneck in the overall system, then you're not going to get any end-to-end throughput increase. So understanding bottleneck governance and management, key part of DevOps. Continuous integration and deployment is just really coming back to our roots for what it means to do good software configuration management, good version control, getting into the habit of daily checking in my code into the trunk and having continuously integrated code so there's always a fresh and most up-to-date version of that code for other activities around branching and continuous delivery and deployment, which is a habit of how do we build those feedback loops in the conversation of the adaptive and iterative design. Of course, we're talking about some new elements here, which is the machining side of it, the automation, and that's also part of DevOps. And then we can't forget the fact that, as we talked about, we have to understand we have to have conversations around strategy, around design, around transition and move to production. So we have to understand that we have to accelerate, but accelerate what? Well, it's the accelerating of the things we've done for a living for the last, 2 decades, 3 decades of our careers. So all of this is just DevOps. Right? Which just is an interesting word. It's a lot. But think about those 7 blind men and the elephant again. Because if you're the tooling side of the equation, you think it's all about automation. If you're in the development role, then you're thinking, well, it's all about Agile and some Agile variant or methodology like Scrum. Yes, and actually, it's all of these. So this is kind of the larger leadership perspective of the question of the practices of DevOps. So just to give you kind of a sense here, let's kind of dig a bit deeper. The reality is we're in this value system. There are people who have a role in every piece of the value system. People who talk to customers, people who come up with design blueprints and requirements generation, people who have to go build this stuff, people then have to kind of move it into production, and people who get to support it at the other end. All of these people, called agents in the system, right? Groups could be agents. If they don't share a common purpose and set of priorities, an interesting thing happens when we all have them be agile. So let's imagine a system where there isn't a shared constancy of purpose, which is a lean principle, right? This belief and shared accountability doesn't exist across the people who do all of this work collectively, but seemingly mythically in isolation. If they're all being agile in different directions, what happens to velocity? So the concept of being agile, quick, nimble, flexible, without a common sense of direction can actually decrementally impact flow, killing velocity. So this is why it's important, we move back from the agile premise of just accelerating, plan, build to bring back the entire value system of Dev and Ops together so that we're assuring that we're all going in the same direction, pulling in the same direction, if you will, on the oars. So this is a critical aspect of speed, which is shared purpose, shared accountability. Our challenge is that, one of the challenges is the governance and leadership challenge. We talk about enterprise IT, this concept that we have this kind of purview or governance across all of the aspects of our value system. Our challenge is that we have silo and mental models which are vertical, not horizontal. We optimize vertically by department, by team, or by segment in the life cycle, if you will, and we don't think horizontally. And let's face it, not only do we not think horizontally, sometimes we don't even like each other, right? Because we have, in premise, different goals. On the left hand, I've got the development and time is money, and that's a true statement. We've got to go faster. On the right hand, I've got this resilience, this availability, this compliance, this, this maturity premise. That's also true. But that's where we talk about that we can achieve quality and flow at the same time by practices around, first time right, ensuring that we build tested automated testing into our practices. Because we have to find a way to deliver both. We can't just focus on flow and not the quality and control perspective. Because what happens when that happens is not nice things, right? We have no sense of shared accountability. We have no sense of shared value in the collective thing that is done. So this is another reason that we talk about structure changes. So the DevOps team is this concept of let's pull a group together that have representation at different points in the IT tribe system and they together collectively are going to be accountable for the outcome of the total value they're creating and the changes they're making. So there's no, sorry, Kimosabi, it's your problem now. The reality is it's a we versus me premise. And so you can deal with this in structure by pulling together these teams, whether they're dedicated teams or they're hybrids where they relate both to a function called, database administration, but also a part of a DevOps team for a specific service. These are parts of the discussion around structure. Because the whole premise of DevOps is to pull the ops forward back into design, which, by the way, if you're an ITIL person on the call today, you'll understand a service design package, which means what are all the attributes and requirements for design, is considered in design. We're not just focused on feature and function, but we're also focused on non-functional requirements. The whole security requirements, the architectural requirements, the supplier integration, the support model development. That all should be done as part of the non-functional aspects of sprints, not just feature focused. That's what it means to pull operational requirements earlier into the design conversation. So, one of the things that we do at our conference every year that we happen in February is we do this think tank. We pull together people from a different perspective and get different insights around key questions. And this year's question was, how do you run a multi-speed organization where this fast velocity challenge is necessary? And one of the challenges, of course, that DevOps addresses nicely is the whole premise of, wouldn't it be nice to work together, structurally get a better sense of collaboration? So of about 100 organizations that were surveyed at this conference, this was the question asked, one of many, and this was the response that we saw. The good news here is only 9% aren't planning to start at all, right? Getting people to work together across tribes and silos. But you can see that we're just starting. Most organizations are we're getting going on this. Yes, we realize it's a need, and we've got to fix this artificial divide that's really promoted by structure and how we measure structure. We focus vertical and not horizontal. So this is an industry issue that everyone is facing and dealing with pretty much at this point. So thinking about that lean. So lean begins the journey. It begins the whole conversation in the yellow box there. I know who my customer is and what they value. I get a voice of customer analysis. I look at the way the value is delivered. I actually visualize the value stream, because if I'm going to improve flow, I can't improve what I don't understand and can't see. So let me look at this overall connective tissue of the horizontal and see where bottlenecks exist, where that's the blue. I can improve flow and deal with bottleneck issues, deal with rework, or work keeps getting kicked back 3 steps because I always seem to be missing this one field in a form that's not completed. And then I move to pull, because let's make sure that what's in the system is coming from a customer perspective, and this is where Agile will focus on product backlog and customer conversation around prioritization. The product manager, product owner around this product backlog, they're deciding what the priorities are for the sprints and the going forward practice. And we're never going to stop. This is perfection. In that lean world, we focus on continuous flow, removing the crazy stuff called waste, improving the end-to-end cycle time. Smoke is focused on small batch, work in progress, which is WIP. Can't overburden any one resource and expect them to work twice as fast. All of this is the basis of the acceleration principles of Agile and DevOps. So think about it this way, right? In the beginning was Mama Lean. That's at the base of our pyramid. And Mama Lean asks you some questions. What does your customer really value? How do we deliver that value faster? And how do we actually reduce waste and optimize costs? Those are the 3 premises of value. And that gets into principles like you see on the left, true north. We all have a shared constancy of purpose. We have a Kaizen mindset. We're never stopping to figure out how do we fix these issues and improve flow and remove waste. We go see teamwork, respect. All of these lean principles birthed the Agile movement. And the Agile movement, as referenced in the Agile Manifesto, was really kind of an IT orientation of the lean principles in the manifesto. And a lot of that comes from the lean thinking and the small batch premise of lean. And all of this lean premise of acceleration is now evidenced at the top of the pyramid in the various variations of doing Agile in a SDLC or project management perspective. So Agile is a principle-based, just like lean is a principle-based component, and you can practice being Agile by choosing several different variants. This is simply a small list. There's probably another good half a dozen more above and beyond what you see here. But Scrum is simply a variant of Agile method. There are other variants like SAFe or Kanban, which is very lean-oriented. So these things you have to understand. This is the kind of the basis of understanding of the holistic system. So another interesting question we asked at our conference, this is again these 100 companies that are being surveyed here. So this year, your strategic priorities, the things you're currently working on, what do you think, what are you working on right now? And I would like to note everything to the right. If I had asked this question 2 years ago, I can guarantee you that this pie would look very different. So everyone, there's still a lot of work in service management, as you would expect at the Pink Elephant Conference, but look to the right. The thing I want to note to the right, first of all, the size of the green versus the red. A lot of organizations, almost all organizations, are moving to this small batch accelerated approach. Not to say that waterfall is completely not relevant, but waterfall does require you to have a very predictive, stable environment that doesn't change dynamically over a period of time, which of course is a very rare thing in our industry. So this whole let's work in smaller batches, smaller time frames makes more sense because of the dynamic nature of our industry. But what I want to point out is that everything on the right is relatively new. We're talking 2, maybe 3 years maximum in the concept of adoption, not existence, of these practices. The rate of adoption on the things on the right is dramatic and is unprecedented in the adoption of various things that we've seen in the past in our industry. And if I'm planning to ask the same question in February again, and I'm going to guarantee you in my view of how things are moving that everything on the right is going to be larger again. So this is moving at lightning speed, wildfire speed, those Games of Thrones enthusiasts, because of just the industry pressure that we're seeing. Another thing that's changing in the industry right now is I've expressed this to a couple of colleagues, it's like we're having this terminology wash right across the industry. This is Scrum terminology, again, which is one variant of Agile, a very popular variant, but not the only variant. And the things I just want to put out there right now, not to teach you the conversation of what is Scrum, but all of these words now, product backlog, sprints, daily scrums or day start meetings, burn down charts, Scrum masters, this whole terminology is becoming pervasive. And so one of the things that's very important for your teams to understand is that they need to understand what these terminology changes are. So we are still talking about many of the same things, getting customer requirements and establishing a build practice around those, moving those into production, getting feedback, user acceptance testing we used to call it. But now the reality is this language is changing, so it's important that we keep up with the language changes. And it all comes from this Agile movement here that's part of the acceleration premise. So I mentioned that theory of constraints is key. This is, if you're going to accelerate pace, accelerate velocity of a value system, you have to understand where the bottlenecks are. Because as I mentioned, if you accelerate a non-bottleneck, well then you're not going to do much in the respect of improving end-to-end cycle or lead time. Understanding bottlenecks and what to do when they occur is part of the premise of improving flow. And this is, again, as I mentioned, a part of the DevOps premise as well. So, simply put, you can see a bottleneck in a system pretty clearly when you see a bunch of work piling up in front of someone's inbox or task base and stuff's not flowing faster through that. So you can deal with that bottleneck by either dynamically increasing capacity, could be through systems dynamics, or just adding another person to the task permanently. So, the thing about bottlenecks, once I govern and figure out how to flow the bottleneck faster, think about what will immediately occur in your system. Another bottleneck, and another bottleneck. And so this concept of bottleneck management is key. Not that there will ever not be a bottleneck. All systems will have one. But the question is, at what point does the speed of the system equal the rate of demand coming in? And now we have equilibrium. And this is the premise of theory of constraints. It's balancing demand and supply, a key principle in respect to optimizing flow. I lost my thing here, Deborah. Thank you very much. Because we have to understand that what we live in is not centers of excellence, vertically oriented, silos, tribes. What we live in is a horizontal value generating system, and it's only as strong as its weakest link. So governance, if you consider governance not compliance, the concept of parenting, right? I have a direction that I would like this to be, this future state that I've envisioned as good, and I have a current state that I understand, and I look at the gaps and I direct their closure. That's governance. That should be end-to-end, not vertically oriented. But the challenge today is many organizations don't have anything that looks like enterprise governance. They have governance by silo. They have IT strategy for operations, IT strategy for development times X, and we're fragmented in the parenting and governance approach. That can't happen in a world that's focused on enterprise velocity. That means that continual improvement also has to look at it from a value system orientation, a dev and ops orientation. So CSI has to look at the entire system from the point of view of what's killing flow, where do I need to optimize work in progress so that I get optimum resource use on people, where do I have to find waste elements that I can pull out of the system because it doesn't make any sense to do the crazy stuff anymore. It has to be holistic in this premise. So, of course, last but not least, well, actually not last, but close to the end, and why I've actually put this question near the end of the practice conversation, we're going through this kind of that fan grid, is because a lot of people think, well, DevOps is all tooling. Tooling is incredibly important because, again, if we can improve machine time, which is the principle of non-human resource time, we can improve both the accuracy, consistency, as well as the automation speed of something. So tooling is about, automating practice. Now, the interesting thing about automating practice is another key thing that DevOps requires is standardizing practice. I have to agree on standardizing things like, server builds. And I have to say that we have a standard small, medium, and large server, and here's the base configurations. And if we do configure above and beyond, we have to agree on what those options are. I have to agree on standard environments. I have to agree on standard versioning controls for trunk management. So just remember that automation comes with another challenge, which is agreement to standardize, which is something we don't necessarily do well in a highly variant, vertically oriented culture. But key question. So we use DevOps principles of automated testing, continuous integration, and deployment to automate how we change and how we improve quality and cost to market. So as you can see, the vast majority are on the path of automated everything, right? We plan to start 30%. We have started 31%, but a very small percentage of the folks in the survey have made much headway. Not because the tools aren't available, because you could go to half a dozen tools today and get those tools. It's about the whole question of agreement on standards and standard practice, which makes, which is required for the automated aspect. Please continue. Next slide. There we go. Which takes us to, the premise of continuous integration, deployment, and automation. All right, so we talked about this briefly earlier, that what we're really talking about is just back to basics. We're doing decent and robust software configuration management. We're establishing version controls. We're ensuring people have discipline and standards around how they store code back on the trunk, the code repository, and that they're always pulling fresh code, and that we're getting to this place where we can move more and more to production on a rapid basis. So, you talk about those organizations which do hundreds and sometimes thousands, apparently, of code promotes to production a day. That means that they're highly standardized, or they've built an architecture which is completely decoupled, and or they can fail back very easily because of their discipline around software configuration and rollback automation to previous state. So these are all disciplines, because all of this requires discipline to do this rapid continuous integration and deployment. There's also this premise of branching, where if we do have a need to have a larger feature build, which is a bit more riskier and has a bit more complexity in its relationship and design, we can still basically apply the principle of continuous integration and deployment. One of the ways we could talk about that is that there's a difference between the concept of delivery versus deployment. Remember, the key goal is rapid value generation, short feedback loops, because as the product owner is able to see the thing in production, they have 5 more ideas about how it could actually work. So it's still possible to do short feedback loops in a non-production aspect. I can put it into a UAT environment, which is mirroring the production environment, and I could do rapid sprint iterations into that in a concept of a branching strategy into the continuous delivery. And then when I have a set of features ready, I can then move that as a package and deploy into the production environment. Now remember, a key principle of value generation is that we basically are governed by the ability of the business to receive. So it's not just how fast we can go, it's how fast it can be absorbed. If there are things like incidents that have to be restored, or there's standard changes or patch updates which are not impacting on feature or function to the business, of course we can standardize and make those changes on an everyday basis as long as we have the basis for doing that. When they're a bit more heavy, feature-oriented, they're focused on business requirements, we may need to package those up into a branching strategy. We do this because the voice of customer requirement, not because we have this method of doing so. So this is still meeting the standard conversations that ITIL brings to the table, where we get standard changes, which we move down the stack of risk to the point we can basically pre-approve them. But some things are a little bit more complex, and they have to be looked at in a more holistic and more timely basis for strategizing their deployment. So to do all this, our industry is improving on its automation side. So we need good tools to allow for these good practices for acceleration. So we have good tools to support code control and trunk management. We have runbook automation that allows us to do build automation and deployment automation. We have test automation, and that's a completely different way, of course, of architecting and developing applications, where we can actually say, a given developer's time is spent in 1/3 feature build and 2/3 test build, so that the system itself is self-healing and self-testing. So that allows us to do first time right, move the quality issues to the left. And if we can't do that through automation, through testing, through build practice, some organizations do this through dual programming, where they have 2 programmers side by side, being the conscience in the eyes of the other person. Right? So we try to ensure that testing is done at source, not later down the pipeline in a quality control or QA group, 2/3 down the flow. We have this premise of continuous integration and automation. That's this whole continuous integration to either UAT or into the delivery to the UAT or deployment to production. So this is packaging and runbook automation. All of these tools are existing today. We just need the practices and agreement and the structure and the processes to use them. And a key part of that, as I mentioned earlier, is standardization. So these are all good practices for accelerating and automating the accelerating aspect, which is a big part of DevOps. Again, back to automate which those things we can standardize. The last part of the conversation is the ITSM integration. And you can argue that one way to look at the need of ITSM is to describe what happens when it's not well integrated with the build practices. So I'll kind of tell you a story, and this story builds on a premise, put out in the Phoenix Project book as well. We'll talk about planned and unplanned work. For the moment, just understand that planned work is something that you intended to do when you came in on Monday morning. Lean would call this value-added work because, if asked, the customer who's paying would say, that's worthy and I'm willing to pay for that if given a choice. So there's 4 types of value-added work. There's net new customer projects, the stuff we do because that adds value to the customer. There's foundational projects that IT must do around storage or network that are necessary, like the air we breathe to do the customer projects. There's changes, because by the nature of what a change is, it's either supposed to enhance or repair, so that's improve, so that's planned work. And then there's operate. There are some people who sit down and they watch screens because that's what they do, like Homer Simpson in the nuclear factory, hopefully not eating too many donuts, but he's operating, right? He's watching. So you came to work to do one of those planned pieces of work. The unplanned is what happens when something breaks and we all have to scramble, right? So let me play this through for you. Remaining time, we're just about done. So the first thing that most organizations focus on of these 3 value streams, and that's what you're looking at here, is the build value stream, this application development project-oriented value stream, because that's where net new value is created. And so obviously that's where the customer would prefer you to spend most of your time. So all these projects, in the way they're classically done, they basically stand up this large monolithic project, they second to themselves all the people, resources, and they're like these trains that get plugged onto their own tracks and they start moving down towards production. Now imagine each train getting stood up and moving down to production, and they all got their team on board, but they're all self-governing. They're all kind of, orchestration is only in and among itself. It's this self-contained entity. And they're all moving down this track, and I'll change my metaphor to planes. They're all flying in to this one runway called the production environment, your live data center. But they're not coordinated. Using the plane metaphor, each of them have their own control tower for so-called landing this initiative, but those control towers are all separate and distinct and they don't communicate. So as you can probably see, this is not actually a good recipe for safe landing. So the question that I would then ask you to consider, what is the worst day to be on the help desk or service desk? And of course, Monday pops into your mind because you came into work planning to do one of these 4 valuable things, but you get called the moment you get in or even before you get into work to say, SOS, we've got a problem here, and so you dive into support, which is the bottom right value stream. Not to say support is bad, but we'll come back to that. So you spend most of your Monday doing unplanned work. If you're lucky, you're out by Monday afternoon, but most of us probably get Tuesday, all right, before we've cleared ourselves from the weekend's changes and the impact of such. That means that you haven't been on your email for the past 2 days, so you've got to catch up on Wednesday. And now Thursday, if God permits, you are able to finally get back to that thing called quote-unquote planned work. Now, throw in the context that you probably have 5 or 6 pieces of planned work, and now you're switching too many value streams and you're losing productivity because you have to now try to get 5 things moving at the same time. You're going to lose a little bit of productivity just from what's called context switching, which is another lean issue, by the way. So I ask this question over and over again where I talk to different organizations and speak to them about these issues. And I want you to think about what percentage of time does your team typically spend in something called planned work versus unplanned. I just want you to think about that. The percentage of the week spent in unplanned versus planned activity. Now, I'll tell you almost universally across all of the organizations that I've worked with, it usually comes into about 15, maximum 20%, depending on the role that you play. Now, I want you to imagine what Lean calls non-planned work. which, remember, in a layman's conversation is something the customer would willingly pay. The planned work is something, or value is something that the customer would willingly pay for if given a choice. Well, I can imagine that unplanned work wouldn't be in that category, so Lean would call that waste. That means that we spend up to 80% of our day, month, week in activity that doesn't add value. That's because we haven't built integrations into the other service management initiatives. Now, it works a little bit different in the DevOps context in that the team has got a representative from each part of the value stream, but I'm still going to have to build competency for things like strategy, portfolio, financial management, things in design around supplier integration, architecture, security, availability, capacity, disaster recovery, move to production coordination. And while these exist, they might be pulled on as centers of excellence, but they still have to exist. Because if they don't exist, we get the result of their non-use, which is this discussion I've just described to you. Our challenge is that we should be getting better at this, right? There should be this closed loop learning premise that, hey, 80% of our time spent in waste is probably insane, a hamster wheel of death, so let's get off. But it doesn't happen because we're not looking at it from this horizontal perspective. And your challenge is that you get this opportunity to be in all three, but where do you spend most of your time, or where does your team spend most of your time? Right. This is what happens when we don't integrate the service management and SDLC aspects together. It's the cause and effect. The final challenge of all of this is that basically, if those organizations who've so-called even implemented service management have done maybe incident, problem, and change, which is stuff to the far right. And the real question is, what does that do about getting rid of the sources of unplanned work, which is to the left of the red line, called development? And the answer to that is nothing. It just helps us get out of the way faster, run faster on the wheel. So this is the challenge when we don't integrate service management into this dialogue. It's kind of wrapping up here, and we can get some questions. The thing is, this means that your DevOps organization needs skills and knowledge. And the DASA model is very good because it's outlined 12 areas of specific skills and knowledge that you need to think about in the context of the wheel that they've put together, but also this fan of capability and practice that I've presented here. You need skill around structure and team design. You need skill in Lean. You need skill in Agile methodology. You need skill in theory of constraints on the automated skill around CI/CD and automated testing and deployment. And you don't let go of your ITSM because that has to be brought in, because you can't accelerate nothing. You have to accelerate something. And that's ITSM, that's SDLC, and project management, the things we've always done. So skills around this whole elephant, if you will, is a critical aspect of just delivering quality at speed. So I know it's been a bit of a fire hose, but this is what leaders have to understand about the more systemic, holistic perspective of what is DevOps. I'll turn it back over to you, Deborah.
Well, thank you for that, Troy. And I think that that is very key, right? When we look at the type of organizations that are looking to take advantage of DevOps now, they're not just smart, these startup companies that can start out with these DevOps teams. These are established blue chip enterprise organizations that also want to take advantage of that. They have existing IT service management installations. They've invested greatly in the training of their people, and trying to bring all that skills and knowledge together to get value is what we see that they're asking for. So thank you for that. I think it's really good for our audience to kind of understand the connectivity, to understand the challenges that leadership has in trying to make that all come together and enable their teams and their employees to take advantage of the skills they have, and at the same time take advantage of those new emerging areas that you talked about in terms of lean IT and DevOps and Agile. So I know we have a little bit of time, a few minutes left, but I do have a question for you, and I'm asking the audience as well, if you have some questions, to please just put them in chat, and I will be able to address them for you. But Troy, can you describe some ways in which DevOps is actually different than Agile?
Yes. So think back to that early slide, Deborah, where I showed kind of the evolution from Mama Lean to Agile to DevOps. So Agile, it was great in the premise of acceleration, but it largely focused on the plan build side, the pre-production side. And it did improve speed of iteration, speed of development of work on the design. But because it didn't have the whole end-to-end value system in mind, it actually caused a downstream impact to and increase the bottleneck of go to production. So it actually decrementally impacted the total value system delivery by not including or considering the run side of the equation. So DevOps, a key part of its structure and culture, is to fix that disparity and now build DevOps teams and consider the flow of value, pulling operation requirements forward into design to make sure that they repair that deficiency of not considering the total value system.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And another interesting question has come up. Can you explain how DevOps relates to best practices like ITIL, TOGAF, COBAT?
So yeah, that was the conversation we were having just a few minutes ago. Remember, you have to accelerate something, right? It changes a little bit in the sense that the way the processes work are not in their own senses isolated from the DevOps practices. In the past, what we've had is a center of excellence, and you had a person who's kind of been inserted into a conversation at the right time, at the right place, in the respect for the design, build, move to production. Today, in the DevOps world, what we would have would be a person on the DevOps team, which is a permanent or hybrid structure, would be pulling from and bringing to the table that part of the expertise that exists within the organization. So they represent within the DevOps team the practice that still has to exist and still has to be a center of excellence, but they're not sliding in and out of the team. They're there as a permanent team, or they're bringing to the table that component of the conversation, whether it's a design, a strategy, or a move to production requirement.
Okay, thank you for it. I have a question from David, and he says many organizations struggle to integrate project management with ITSM. Do you think they may succeed using DevOps, and why?
Yeah, so one of the interesting perceptions that's incorrect for most organizations is they think that project management is somehow parallel to ITS, not parallel, excuse me, sequential. Then on the front end, you have project management, and then it plugs in downstream to ITSM. What I like you to think about is something along the line of the previous slide, that they all run in parallel. In fact, think of it like this. I have this visual that I like to draw for people. Think of a value system and structure it, and on the front end, you have what they call the storefront. And so there's front-end engagement processes. There's BRM at strategic level. There's the catalog at the tactical level, and then there's the service desk at the operational. Think of those as kind of three doors of coming in demand. And then all of these demand channels, strategic, tactical, and operational, feed up through requests and then into portfolio on decisioning for what the portfolio needs to be today and needs to be tomorrow, and investment prioritization. That kicks off a factory process, which is now parallel, and it begins to run. Like, now think of this in the middle. On the build side of it, whether it's iterative or monolithic, that's your choice, but this build piece is moving along. And now think of the other ITIL process sitting on top of that build, like it's a conveyor belt, and it's feeding into the project the non-functional requirements for design, disaster recovery, strategic supplier integration, support model development. and I need you to think about, that these non-functional processes or idle processes are feeding into the project, which are, flowing below it at the right moment, at the right time, the various pieces of it. And then it comes out on the right-hand side. Now I move to production, and I'm, delivering this value, and I might now need to support it and send the trucks out to repair it when it breaks. But I like to look at ITIL not in this circle, but in this kind of horizontal perspective where the build side of SDLC or project management is smack in the middle. Right? There's stuff on the front end, which is ITSM, stuff that basically is over on top of the SDLC, and stuff on the other side, which is support. So think of it like a wrapper, and the build piece is right in the middle.
Okay. So I have another question for you. It's from Kelly. She says, I work for a software company that uses Agile development. I am the support readiness team lead working on trying to help the software be more supportable to our customers. I've been trying to discuss DevOps with R&D folks, but they see it as IT. I think the same concepts apply. Do you agree?
Oh, totally. There's a movement out there to talk about biz DevOps, right? This is where Agile gets into the, the product owner perspective. The DevOps team needs to include the business perspective because they are, in essence, part of the front-end requirements design perspective. See, the reality is there's no true separation between a business outcome and its automation. They're one and the same. IT has become so dependent for business that it's now the line. And to not invite the, the factory manager or the, the line to a strategic discussion on business strategy and research and development would be kind of insane because you're thinking that basically that this is separate things.
Okay. Philip has a question. He says, having ITSM implies having operations engineers with more development skills.
Mm-hmm. So one of the key premises of automation or machine time is the move towards virtual infrastructure as code, right? Server as code, databases as code, well, network as code, probably that's a better example. And so these all still exist within physical entities, but the reality is we're spinning up whole environments, and now containers not even needing environments. But the reality is we replicate and we create virtual objects, which used to be physical. So the engineer that is moving from the physical to the virtual now needs to become a coder. They have to understand how to develop scripts to define standard specifications for the build of these virtual objects, as well as their packaging and promotion now as a total environment. Now, most organizations are going to be in a mixed scenario, right? They're going to have still infrastructure, physical infrastructure for some time to come, but the general move is to the virtual orientation of our infrastructure. So that means that these traditional infrastructure people now become more code-oriented in the scripting and development of the VM machine and objects.
Okay, and I just have two final questions because we're really kind of over time, but they're really interesting questions that have been coming in. I thank the audience for that. And Nathan has a question, is if there are multiple projects running simultaneously on a platform, how is speed measured?
Mm-hmm. So, well, first, each project is self-contained, of course. There's still sprints that are separate, but even in the Scrum methodology, we talk about Scrum of Scrums, which means we haven't left behind this premise of project, program, and portfolio, which is a taxonomy of things which connect to higher initiatives. And so the Scrum of Scrums, or the program of projects, still has to look at the initiatives in respect to its timeline, its cycle time for delivery. Cycle time could be one sprint, but it could be a release which contains many sprints, or it could be several releases, right? This is all just packaging these up into smaller chunks, but the end-to-end still has an envisionment. I still have a go-live premise at some point, and how those things are now measured within the larger context of the program time frame is still relevant. So these principles of portfolio, program, project haven't gone anywhere. They simply just have new names now with the Agile terminology.
Okay, and thank you. And one last question from me is, in your opinion, Troy, what's the most important aspect of DevOps?
Yeah, it's about the relation piece. It's that first part of comms. I have to start thinking of we the people versus me or I the team. So this premise of structure, this premise of pulling together teams which have a belief that's common, that share accountability for outcomes, the structural component of DevOps to me is the primary and the most important thing, and all of the other things are great. But if you don't get the structure right and the teaming right, everything else is going to fail.
Right. Well, thank you for that, and I want to thank you for this presentation. I think it was highly insightful in terms of understanding how all the pieces come together and how teams can become more effective, and the type of questions that leadership needs to be asking themselves when their teams become engaged and begin to do more cross-functional type of activities with DevOps and Scrum and Agile and Lean. So thank you so much, Troy, for your presentation. So for the audience, I had a final question, and that was, is this webinar being recorded? The answer is yes. We're going to make it also available on the DASA website for you. If you don't know, we're having another webinar tomorrow. We call these our 30-minute deep dive webinars. It's going to be tomorrow morning at 4 p.m. So probably for most of you in this audience, it's going to be way too early in the morning for you. It's going to be 10 minutes at Central European time and 4 p.m. in Hong Kong time. But the good news is we are recording it, and we're going to be joined by Frederick Chuckin, who is a senior consultant at Quint Wellington Redwood. And Frederick is actually going to spend some time talking about the DevOps principle number 4, which is the DASA DevOps principle about cross-functional autonomous teams. And he's going to be talking about how product organizations with vertical, fully responsible teams, how they must fully have autonomous teams throughout the life cycle of the product. So he's going to spend some time talking about that and how these teams become a hotbed for personal development and growth. So don't worry, if it's not in your time zone, not to worry, you'll be able to find it. We'll either have it on SlideShare or we'll have a link for it on our website for DASA. So I want to, again, thank all of you for joining Troy and I today. Again, thank you, Troy. These are our contact details. Do feel free to reach out and send us a question if you have it. Really appreciate you taking and investing your time to spend the last 60-plus minutes with us today. So again, Troy, thank you so much. And to the audience, I wish you a great rest of your day. And you'll be hearing from me because we'll be advertising soon and promoting our new Master Series programs that will be made available to you. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Troy. Bye for now.